At the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean lies a German battleship whose name alone inspired fear in the early days of World War II. The Bismarck, Hitler's state-of-the-art killing machine. Heavily armored, massively armed.
There was nothing that we had that could quite match her.
The British Royal Navy sets off in a desperate bid to stop her.
Our object was to sink her.
Follow Bismarck's deadly maiden voyage moment by moment, as told by the last remaining survivors and the mangled wreckage below. It's the ultimate battle to sink one of history's most dreaded sea weapons. May 19th, 1941. The massive Nazi battleship Bismarck leaves Germany, accompanied by the battle cruiser Prince Eugen. Their secret mission, codenamed Exercise Rhine, to sneak into the Atlantic Ocean and wreak havoc on British and Allied ships. Under the command of Admiral Gunther Lutyens and Captain Ernst Lindemann, Bismarck's crew of more than 2,000 German sailors begins the maiden voyage of the state-of-the-art supership. May 21st. Bismarck and Prince Eugen arrive in a fjord in German-occupied Norway. Before heading into battle, the crew enjoys what will be its last moments of peace and quiet.
It was a beautiful day when we were anchored in that fjord. We were allowed to walk around on deck.
Bismarck's crew is young and inexperienced, and proud to be on board the brand new battleship.
I was thrilled. Everyone thought, this ship will never sink. She's so huge, and there are so many weapons.
Bismarck is the embodiment of Hitler's quest to dominate the high seas.
Bismarck was an accumulation of all German naval technology at that time. She was the biggest battleship, she was the most powerful battleship, she was actually one of the fastest battleships at that time.
She weighs in at more than 58,000 tons and is 825 feet long. Despite her massive size and thick armor, she can cruise at nearly 35 miles per hour. And Bismarck boasts powerful artillery. Each of her 15-inch guns can hurl a small car 22 miles.
The combined firepower from Bismarck, with all 8 15-inch guns firing at once, she could throw a total of nearly 15,000 pounds of steel at her enemy.
The Germans are confident that Bismarck will turn the war at sea in their favor. But little do they realize what awaits their supership. May 21st, 1941. The Bismarck crewmen anxiously wait for nightfall to launch their secret mission. But soon, they eye trouble in the sky.
And I wondered, what is that plane doing here? It was a Spitfire, no doubt about it.
A British reconnaissance plane spots the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen and takes this now famous photograph. The German plan to keep Bismarck's mission a secret is now dashed. The British know that danger is imminent and Bismarck is a serious threat.
She was something which we all felt in the Royal Navy had to be destroyed, had to be cornered and attacked and sunk.
By 1941, Britain is the last enemy standing. Despite suffering heavy German air attacks, the country is still defiant. The Royal Navy controls the seas, but Bismarck is a challenge to even its best ships. The British need to find her and eliminate her. Evening, May 21st. Despite being spotted by the British, the German ships leave Norway to carry out Exercise Rhine. Before setting sail, Prince Eugen tops off her fuel tanks, but Bismarck does not. A decision that will later come to haunt the Germans. 60 years later, 600 miles off the coast of France, an international team prepares to make the first manned dives to the Bismarck. On board are 2 German veterans. The trip marks a return to one of the most traumatic events of their lives. Heinz Stieg and Heinrich Kundt are among the very few survivors of Bismarck's fiery end. Only 116 men out of 2,200 were rescued.
This brings back long suppressed memories.
Immer unter Deck gehalten wird, ne?
The submersibles touch down nearly 3 miles below sea. For the first time since May 1941, human eyes gaze directly on Bismarck's decks. The subs will explore the remains of the massive wreck from bow to stern for up to 12 hours until low oxygen and power levels force them to leave. Then the team endures a 2-hour ascent, surfacing in the black of night, to bring back the first high-definition images of the wreck site, evidence that reveals the course of Bismarck's final battle. The next morning on the expedition vessel, the veterans begin a virtual dive into the past.
Ready? Yep.
Stieg and Kundt confront what's left of the Bismarck.
Wunderbar.
Fantastic footage.
Oh, thank you.
The images take them back to when a chain of bad luck and wrong decisions would determine their ship's fate. Beginning with Bismarck's hasty departure from Norway. Evening, May 21st, 1941. Bismarck foolishly doesn't refuel before leaving the fjord, but other earlier mistakes are already in play.
Bismarck was not fully prepared when she left Germany to go on this first operation. One of the biggest problems was that her anti-aircraft batteries were incomplete.
A big disadvantage now that a British airborne attack is an increasing threat. On the sea floor lie Bismarck's mangled anti-aircraft guns, guns that were unable to effectively attack British planes. Normally, anti-aircraft guns defend a ship against attacks by creating an umbrella of lethal fire. It takes coordinated firing of all weapons for this to work properly. But Bismarck's weapon systems fail her. In the rush to get the battleship into service, she's outfitted with antiquated anti-aircraft guns. And the firing systems used to control the guns don't work in tandem. The coming change of seasons may help explain the Germans' haste in getting Bismarck out to sea. German admirals hope the long Arctic nights will provide a helpful cover of darkness as the battleship breaks through into the Atlantic. But by the month of May, nights are getting shorter and time is running out.
The other factor was the development of new radar technology.
Both sides are evenly matched in new advances in radar that use radio signals to see distant objects. But they use this technology in different ways.
The Germans in the first line used radar technology as a means of range finding for artillery purposes, while the British relied on radar as a detection device,
which proves a decisive advantage in the battle to come. Two British cruisers keep watch in the Denmark Strait, one of the possible corridors into the Atlantic. On May 23rd, they spot the German ships.
When Bismarck encountered the heavy cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk in the Denmark Strait, she rapid-fired her main caliber guns at these two cruisers. And that knocked out her main radar antenna.
For the first time on her maiden voyage, the Bismarck fires, but hurts only herself. Hastily installed, Bismarck's forward radar antenna can't withstand the shock of her own powerful armament. Now her radar abilities are significantly reduced.
This led to the changing of position of Bismarck and Prinz Eugen.
Undetected by the British, the Prinz Eugen, with all her radar installation still intact, takes the lead. Meanwhile, British heavy units are drawing near from the south, including the brand new battleship Prince of Wales and the flagship of the Royal Navy, the Hood. Launched in 1918, her victorious career earned her the nickname, the Mighty Hood.
People felt that the Hood was unsinkable. No ship is unsinkable, but they had this fantasy in their minds.
With the Suffolk and the Norfolk on their heels, the German ships steamed toward the open Atlantic and their first battle. On board the Prince of Wales, preparations are in full swing.
And we were able to plot the course and position of the Bismarck and work out exactly what time we should be meeting her in the morning. Well, this, of course, was very exciting to know that you were going to have the hell of a battle at, say, 5:30, which, if I remember right, was about the time.
And at 5:35 a.m., the Prinz Eugen, followed by the Bismarck, detects the two British ships on the horizon.
We thought nothing could happen. The Bismarck is unsinkable, and we will wipe out everything.
The Bismarck versus the mighty Hood. Two enemy flagships face off. A duel of giants is about to begin, and only one will survive. May 24th, 1941. The British battlecruiser Hood and battleship Prince of Wales are in position at the western end of the Denmark Strait, ready to pounce on the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen. The gap is closing. The Prince of Wales spots Bismarck.
After a few minutes, one suddenly saw a mast come up, and that was a very exciting moment. The mast was followed by a great big bar. Shortly after that, her funnel began to come up, and gradually the whole of the Bismarck came in sight.
But the British battlecruiser Hood makes a fateful mistake. From a distance, the massive silhouettes of the two German ships look the same.
Hood misidentified Prinz Eugen, which was the lead ship in the German task force, as Bismarck, and Hood was firing against Prinz Eugen, in essence, the wrong target.
Behind the Prinz Eugen, Bismarck readies for action and brings the British ships into her sights. She fires her first salvo against the right target.
It almost immediately straddles Hood,
Even with her radar broken, Bismarck's sophisticated aiming systems perform perfectly.
Again, another straddle, so they know they're shooting very well.
And there were huge fountains of water went up from the big shells.
With each salvo, the guns zero in on Hood.
And the ones that went over, passed over us, it sounded like a lot of express trains going over.
Admiral Holland turns the Hood toward the Bismarck at top speed. He knows he has to close the distance to avoid the gunfire that could put a shell in the most vulnerable part of his ship, the decks. Bismarck steers to optimal firing position to allow both her forward and aft turrets, the source of her immense power, to fire on Hood.
If you want to score 3 hits, you had to get about 100 shells into the air.
Battleships and battle cruisers are heavily armored along their sides, but the Hood is vulnerable. The armor under her decks is thin. Now she's at the optimal range for Bismarck's attack.
Admiral Holland's on the bridge of the Hood. He's trying to close the gap between him and Bismarck as fast as possible because he knows his ship is very vulnerable to plunging fire.
Bismarck fires again. One of her shells pierces the thin armor right above the magazine, and Hood's highly explosive 15-inch shells.
And the ship, the Hood, blew up like a great sort of Christmas cracker.
It was a very nasty shock. It was probably the worst shock I had in the whole war, now that I come to think of it.
In a duel that lasts only about 8 minutes, Hood's crew of more than 1,400 men vanishes in an instant. Only 3 survive.
It made all of us in the Navy feel even more strongly that whatever happened, we must try and get the Bismarck cornered at last.
It's a great victory for the Germans. But Bismarck's luck is about to run out. A 14-inch shell from one of the Prince of Wales' main guns rips completely through Bismarck's bow, rupturing a fuel tank and letting seawater rush in. The shell strikes Bismarck near the deck and blows a massive exit hole near the waterline on the opposite side. Bismarck's crew suffers a deadly hit.
That was pretty decisive, because water came in and we were leaving an oil slick behind.
Das ist das Problem.
Look, here.
Back on the expedition vessel, 2 German Bismarck veterans, Heinz Stieg and Heinrich Kundt, inspect the damage from more than half a century before.
Look at the gears here.
When they last saw their ship, they were mechanics in their mid-20s. Now, decades later, they're excited to see the Bismarck one last time and identify parts of the ship visited by the explorers.
Komm, ja. Komm. You can see how that is, yeah? It's just zoom. Yeah.
The veterans agree, here, somewhere hidden by the seabed, must be the crucial exit hole punched by the shell from the Prince of Wales.
About 1,000 tons of fuel was now rendered useless, and so this deprived Bismarck of the valuable fuel that she needed for commerce raiding.
Fuel to conduct her far-ranging mission across the Atlantic. Fuel she could have topped off in Norway while still in German-controlled waters. A decision that now proves pivotal.
With the reduced speed, she still could hit, but she could not run anymore.
The damage is severe. The Bismarck is losing fuel and she can't run at top speed. Admiral Lutyens turns for the nearest port in German-occupied France for repairs. Following new orders, Prince Eugen continues on her own. After only 6 days at sea, Exercise Rhine, Bismarck's first mission to strike Allied shipping, is canceled. Hitler's naval pride, the Bismarck, has tasted her first battle, her first triumph, and the sting of her first wounds. And she doesn't seem so invincible anymore. For Britain and the Royal Navy, there's now one rallying cry: sink the Bismarck. The German battleship steams toward France, with British ships close behind. Her loss of fuel is a major concern. Bismarck must run at a reduced speed in order to make port. The British ships shadow her and maintain radar contact. One British cruiser zigzags to throw off any possible German submarines. On the Bismarck, Captain Lindemann orders a turn to starboard. At the same moment, the British ship turns to port. When it turns back, the Bismarck has slipped beyond the range of British radar and disappears from their screens.
Now Bismarck has escaped them. They don't know where Bismarck is.
But Admiral Lutyens doesn't know the British have lost them, because the Germans are still receiving British radar signals. So the Admiral transmits a report to Berlin.
He thought the British know where I am anyway, so I can send this message without doing any harm. And this was his tragical mistake.
And a boon for the British Navy.
During this period, the British were able to lock in on the German radio signal, and they were able to triangulate the signal directions, thereby giving them a position approximately of where Bismarck was.
But locating the exact position of the Bismarck in the vast ocean is a difficult task. The British send out Catalina flying boats to find her. One of the planes flies for hours, but cloud cover obscures its view. Then, suddenly, amazingly, in a single patch of clear sky, something appears on the water below.
Yes, it is Bismarck. They found the Bismarck.
The British have found the Bismarck, but they haven't stopped her yet. The Royal Navy gathers all her forces to close in for the kill. The Bismarck approaches safe waters and is nearing the protection of the German Air Force.
She had a clear chance to make it to France safely. There was only one chance for the British to stop the Bismarck, and this was by an airborne attack.
Only one ship, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, can stop her now. Seasoned pilots prepare their Swordfish torpedo bombers for the risky mission. The weather is deteriorating, and Bismarck is running out of fuel.
Yeah, I had my wedding ring under my gloves, and I must say that when I was on the flight deck in the aircraft, prior to starting up, I was feeling it and thinking, well, I hope I'm going to get back from this.
Once in the air, there's no time for emotion. The pilots battle the elements and focus on a single mission: kill the Bismarck.
From about 8,000 feet, we turned towards the ship and started our attack.
The Swordfish are sturdy but slow, old technology from an earlier era. It's like David going up against Goliath.
They came towards us, ready to defy death.
And then we simply fired with all our guns.
But incredibly, not one plane is shot down. Bismarck's rush into service, her untrained crew and antiquated anti-aircraft guns now play a devastating role.
the barrels of the heavy anti-aircraft guns, the 10.5 centimeter anti-aircraft guns, could not be trained low enough to fire at the rather slow and low-flying torpedo bombers.
The crew doesn't know what to do.
Dieses haben wir nicht geübt. We weren't trained to shoot planes that were flying at us.
Otto Hunsch mans a 3.7 centimeter anti-aircraft gun, mounted just above a larger weapon.
I was at the 3.7, and when the 10.5 below me was firing, there was such a big flash I couldn't see my target anymore.
Bismarck is blinded, but still fighting.
She was also firing her main armament, and we could see pillars of water ahead of us. If we'd flown into one of those, we would have just disintegrated.
The Swordfish pilots delivered their lethal payloads.
I estimated that I was at about 90 yards when I dropped my fish. My observer, who looked over the side when we turned away from the ship, could see my torpedo running in the water because it leaves a wake behind it.
One torpedo, maybe Patterson's, strikes the Bismarck in the weakest spot below her waterline, the one place that can disable Bismarck and make her vulnerable, the rudder, her Achilles heel.
And I think that it was just luck that we hit her in that position.
That's when they had us.
The Nazi dream to rule the Atlantic is fading fast. On the expedition vessel, painful memories overwhelm two Bismarck veterans. Through the underwater footage, they travel the once familiar decks and relive the moment they realized their ship was doomed. The Supership is crippled. For Bismarck, hope of returning to a safe port is gone. Bismarck drifts helplessly, waiting for the attack they know will come soon. Lucien's radios Berlin. Hitler responds.
We received a message from the Führer. The German nation stands behind you. And Lutyens answered, we'll fight until the last shell.
Doomsday is about to come. The British don't know they've wounded the Bismarck, but the battleship's course indicates that something is wrong. They track the ship and are surprised at her heading.
Course of Bismarck, due north. But due north was towards us.
Now unable to steer, the Bismarck can only move in one direction, right into the hands of the Royal Navy.
It meant that what we had prayed for and longed for was about to happen.
From all over the Atlantic, the British Navy gathers every available force for the approaching battle.
Bismarck could fire nearly 15,000 pounds of steel at her enemies. But in this final battle, she was outgunned by a factor of 5.
As night falls, the crew is worn out and morale is desperately low. They wait for the end.
You didn't know exactly how and when, but you knew it was coming.
The British decide, come morning, the real battle will begin. 8:45 a.m., May 27, 1941. Ready for combat, the famous German battleship Bismarck appears out of the fog.
I don't know what color she was, but she looked to me black and therefore very sinister. and very formidable.
The myth of Bismarck's power is about to be shattered.
8:47 a.m. Rodney opens fire.
Immediately, the Bismarck returns the fire.
But the great battleship moves slowly. Unable to maneuver, she's an easy target. The first shell strikes Bismarck at 8:59, 12 minutes into battle, setting the foredeck on fire and disabling the 2 forward turrets.
Soon they're taking hit after hit after hit.
A shell from Norfolk hits the fire control station on the foretop.
They hit that very early on, and therefore her gun control was not efficient after the first few minutes. And that is when they switched to the after control, and that didn't last very long either. That really finished the Bismarck, because after that they could only fire their big turrets in local control, which is very inefficient compared to director control.
Each of Bismarck's main rear guns now turns to its own rangefinder to aim. They fire at will, but they're ineffective. Shells continue to pound the Bismarck. Nearly 3 miles down, ripped and twisted steel is evidence of the colossal damage. The fire control stations are blown completely off the ship. Shells smash into the hangars, as well as the catapult for the Arado 196 aircraft, rendering them useless. The catapult never launches a single plane. The hangars are still here, but the planes were incinerated in the inferno that consumes the Bismarck. The superheated steel of the wreckage releases carbon, food for bacteria in the deep sea. They're literally eating the wreck, creating eerie icicle-like formations called rusticles. At 9:12 a.m., 25 minutes into battle, shells shatter the bridge, killing the crew. Some believe that Captain Lindemann and Admiral Lutyens die here too. With their main directors knocked out, Bismarck's gunnery crews now fire several salvos under local control. They concentrate on only one ship.
They're firing at Rodney. They actually managed to straddle Rodney within a few salvos.
The Germans are out of lucky hits. The British keep firing back.
They're hitting Bismarck time after time after time. Bismarck takes numerous hits from all calibers of shells from the British Navy. 16-inch shells, 14-inch shells, 8-inch shells, 6-inch shells, 5-inch shells. They're coming down upon Bismarck non-stop.
The once proud Bismarck becomes a slaughterhouse.
Anti-aircraft guns are just shattering to pieces.
We had orders to seek shelter in the superstructure. I felt that it wasn't safe enough. I was hiding behind Turret Dora, where the empty shell casing usually came out. That's how I realized that the turret was out of action.
Turret Dora is knocked out just before turret Caesar fires its last salvo. Smoke forces the crew to abandon the gun. (9:31 a.m., May 27th. After less than 45 minutes, Bismarck's main armament falls silent. But the British continue to fire. Their goal, to sink the supership. From a distance, the British see pieces of the Bismarck blasted off with every impact.
Explosions, fire. It's horrible. There's steel shrapnel flying everywhere. The mainmast gets hit and it topples down on top of the ship and falls overboard. One of the cranes gets hit and it falls down onto the superstructure.
Deep inside the ship, many young engineers, electricians, and radio operators, like Carl Kuhn, remain at their action stations.
I mean, 18 years young. That's when I realized what war is like.
Below the armored deck, they can only imagine the bloodshed and the fires up above.
Slowly it became clear that we were firing less and less, and that we were being fired at more and more. You feel it, you hear it, that's it. But we didn't know what would happen next.
Once Bismarck's guns go silent, the Royal Navy closes in on its target.
The Rodney and King George V closed in closer and closer and closer. So the elevation of their guns, which was started up there, was then down there because they were getting so near.
Rodney approaches the Bismarck at point-blank range for her main artillery. Less than 2 miles now separates the ships.
They can actually see the explosion with pieces of the ship flying apart, flying into the ocean, landing in the ocean. There's shell splashes all around Bismarck from all the different ships that are shooting at her at this point.
It's every man for himself. Many of the sailors aren't familiar with the labyrinth deep down inside the Bismarck.
I was panicked, running around, because I wasn't familiar with all those decks, stairways, and sections.
All they can do is follow their instincts and try to go up.
You move mechanically, full of fear.
If you found whatever hole, you'd climb up.
Then I finally saw some light.
When they finally reach the upper deck, they're shocked at what they find.
A steel cars. Everything was shot to pieces. There was nothing left intact. It was gruesome. Everything was shaved off.
Piles of dead bodies. An inconceivable sight.
And the British shells keep coming.
The only thing you could do was hide behind the big 38-centimeter turrets when the English were firing and try to save your life. It was an inferno you can't describe. I was standing behind the turret and thought about going down inside again. I wanted to fetch my fiancé's photograph, but I decided not to.
Like Hunch, more and more sailors seek shelter behind the D turret.
Here, that's where I got out. And then I was running along this side. Up to here. And then I jumped off.
The British see sailors leaping off the Bismarck into the cold water.
And as we watched, we saw a little trickle of men. As the first time I had seen the enemy in person, a little trickle of men coming out from the superstructure and running down the side of the ship to the quarterdeck, like lemmings jumping into the sea to escape this inferno aboard.
Completely crippled, the hull rolls on the waves, but the ship isn't sinking.
The irony to this is, This is the strength of Bismarck. Bismarck was designed to withstand this type of a battle. And even though the superstructure and the guns and these sort of things are being knocked out and blown overboard and blown to pieces, the hull is holding its strength.
Despite their desperate situation, the Germans won't surrender.
No German sailor wants to see his ship in enemy hands.
For decades, there has been one question. Did the British finish Bismarck off, or did the Germans scuttle her?
Scuttling the ship merely hastened her sinking.
She was a helpless wreck when she sunk, and so it did not change anything whether she was scuttled or sunk by a British torpedo.
The hull is still fairly intact, and here the signs of a possible scuttling are visible. Twisted metal of a water-cooling inlet blown open below the waterline.
The British, of course, don't particularly like to admit it because they like to feel that they'd done it all alone, but it wasn't quite like that.
An order to scuttle and abandon the ship may have allowed the crewmen deep down inside the hull to finally leave their action stations.
As the ship was about to capsize, I blew up my life vest and jumped into the water.
The water temperature is in the 50s, and it's full of oil. Pieces of the ship and dead bodies float in every direction. Then, Bismarck rolls over.
I could draw it now. It went down like this, vertically, by the bow. And it took maybe 5 minutes.
The maiden voyage of the Bismarck is finally over. But for hundreds of sailors in the cold water, the struggle to survive is just beginning.
The only thing I wanted was to see my mother again, and the little girl I had then. You don't bother about how and why. You simply want to.
Following naval tradition, the British cruiser Dorsetshire picks up German sailors. But even rescue is fraught with danger.
They were swimming toward the ship. The waves pulled them back, then smashed them head first against the hull.
The heavy seas hurl some sailors into the side of the ship, head first, knocking them unconscious, certain to drown. It's a ruthless fight for life or death.
The English sailors were throwing down ropes, rope ends, they say in the Navy. Then, when you were halfway up, you had a comrade hanging on your feet, because he too wanted to be rescued, and you fell down again.
Those who make it remain deeply grateful for their lives.
I must repeat it over and over again. The English were treating us like brothers, despite that they had been firing at us half an hour ago. That's amazing. Hard to understand.
Suddenly, an alarm is raised. A U-boat is approaching. The presence of a German submarine is never confirmed, but the British make a devastating decision. To protect her own crew, the Dorsetshire set sail, leaving hundreds of German sailors to drown.
In the Operation Rheinübung, triumph and tragedy are, in a very curious way, mixed, blended together on both sides.
The Germans' early victory over the British battleship the Hood sent more than 1,400 men to a watery grave. But victory ultimately went to the British, as the Bismarck and more than 2,000 of her crew slipped beneath the Atlantic. the disastrous balance of war.
The loss of Bismarck could have been avoided by canceling the operation from the beginning. Sending Bismarck out with the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen against the odds that they knew existed, against a much superior Navy, the British Navy, was, in my opinion, not a smart thing to do.
History is full of if only this, that, or the other had happened or hadn't happened. That's the course of history.
The Bismarck, Hitler's dreaded state-of-the-art killing machine, is defeated after only 9 days at sea and banished forever into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean.